Today is the 11th of June, and the world looks different now. Because today, you sat across from a doctor and heard words you hoped you'd never hear. It doesn't matter what it was. A lump that wasn't benign. Blood work that raised red flags. A scan that revealed something lurking beneath the surface of your peace. The moment the word left the doctor's lips, everything slowed. And one thought echoed louder than any medical term. Why me? Her name is Grace. She's 48, a Christian woman from Springfield, Missouri, a mother of two, a preschool teacher, a devoted member of her church who sings hymns with tears in her eyes and lays hands on others when they're sick. She's the kind of woman who prays for everyone before she even prays for herself. She's the one people go to when their world is falling apart. And now, hers is. It was a Tuesday morning when she got the call. She'd already suspected something wasn't right. The fatigue, the weight loss, the ache in her side that never seemed to leave. But she told herself it was nothing, just stress, just age, just hormones. Until the doctor said her name with a pause in his voice. Until he looked at the chart and avoided her eyes. Then he said the word, "It's cancer." Her breath left her body like a punch to the ribs. The room tilted, her vision blurred. She couldn't tell if it was fear or disbelief. She only knew that the air felt heavy and her hands went cold. If you've ever received a diagnosis, whether it's cancer, diabetes, an autoimmune disorder, or a condition no one knows how to pronounce, you know this moment. The moment the world shifts and nothing feels safe. Even your body, your own skin, feels like a stranger. The people you love don't know what to say. The smiles they offer feel too soft, too shallow. And your faith? It starts to tremble under the weight of what if? But Archangel Michael was there. And so was someone greater. Because Grace is not alone in this moment. And neither are you. Jesus has already walked this path. He was there when the first cell shifted. He was there when your name was typed into the lab results. He was there in the room, even when you felt invisible. And he already knows the outcome. That night, Grace sat on her bed, knees pulled to her chest, Bible unopened beside her. She didn't want scripture. She didn't want encouragement. She just wanted silence to swallow her whole. But the silence didn't come. Instead, she felt warmth at her feet, like someone had entered the room. She didn't hear a voice, but she felt a presence, a peace that didn't make sense, and in her spirit, a whisper. I am with you in this. I will not leave you, even now, especially now I walk with you. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. You might be where Grace is, numb, shaken, trying to figure out how to tell your kids, your spouse, your friends, wrestling with the thought that maybe all those prayers weren't enough. But hear this. A diagnosis is not a defeat. It is a doorway. And Jesus, the one who healed the sick and raised the dead, is standing at that doorknob on the other side of it. He's with you. In the pain, in the fear, in the questions. And this journey you've just begun, it's not the end. It's the beginning of something sacred. In the next part, Michael will reveal the first step in the healing system heaven gives to those who've just heard life-altering news. A system not just for the body, but for the soul. Grace didn't sleep that night. Her mind raced from one terrifying what if to another. What if the treatment doesn't work? What if it spreads? What if she doesn't get to see her kids grow up? She tried to pray, but the words got caught in her throat. She tried to sing, but her voice cracked halfway through "It is well." And that's when she whispered it in the dark. Jesus, I'm scared. No great declarations of faith. No shouting scriptures. Just the rawest kind of honesty. And that's exactly where healing begins. Archangel Michael stood near her unseen by human eyes, but deeply felt by the soul. His message wasn't grand or poetic. It was clear. Healing begins when honesty returns to your altar. Grace had spent years being strong, holding everyone else up, smiling through her own sorrow, putting on faith like makeup thick enough to cover the trembling underneath. But this diagnosis stripped her bare. And for the first time in years, she came to God not as a servant, but as a daughter. Michael revealed the first step in heaven's healing framework for those who've received life-altering news. It's called the Sacred Surrender Principle. It isn't about giving up. It's about letting go of the version of strength that keeps you distant from God. Because the truth is, God doesn't need your performance. He needs your permission. Grace lay in bed and whispered, "I give you my fear. I give you my control. I give you my timeline." She didn't feel holy doing it. She felt exhausted. But that was the offering heaven had been waiting for. Because God doesn't always heal in hospitals first. Sometimes healing starts in your posture. Michael reminded her of Psalm 34-18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." And in that moment, something sacred happened. Not dramatic, not visible, but soul deep. A crack opened in her fear. And through that crack, light poured in. It didn't erase the diagnosis, but it reframed the narrative. Because the diagnosis didn't define her. The presence of Jesus did. If you're listening and your life has just changed with a phone call, a test result, or a quiet, cold word from a doctor, if your nights are long and your prayers feel like echoes, you need to know this. Heaven sees you. Jesus sits with you. And the angels are not far. The Sacred Surrender Principle is your first action step. You don't need to plan your recovery. You don't need to have the perfect attitude. You don't need to pretend to be fearless. You just need to say, "Jesus, I can't carry this alone. I hand it to you." That is where the real journey starts. And when Grace took that step, she woke the next morning not healed in her body, but lighter in her soul. And that allowed her to face the next truth Archangel Michael would reveal, that a diagnosis is never the full story, because faith changes the ending. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old fears. Grace had walked those halls many times for others, to pray, to visit, to offer strength, but never for herself. Now she walked slower, each step heavy with the weight of her own uncertainty. In her purse was a schedule of tests, consultations, and treatment options. In her heart was a question even deeper than fear. Will I be strong enough for this? She wasn't looking for sympathy. She didn't want to be the center of attention. She just wanted someone to see her not as a patient, but as a person navigating something terrifying with trembling courage. And in that hallway, with nurses passing by and machines humming, she felt it again. That same presence, not loud, not invasive, but anchored. Jesus was there. And as she sat in the waiting room, hands clasped, Archangel Michael whispered the next truth in heaven's healing system. You are not walking toward battle. You are walking with the victor. The second principle in the sacred framework is this, the already over revelation. Michael said it plainly. Heaven never starts a journey it hasn't already seen the end of. That means before Grace even heard the word cancer, Jesus had already walked through the outcome. Not in ignorance, not in passivity, but in intimate awareness. Every tear, every cell, every scan. Already seen, already known, already held. Grace opened her Bible that night and landed on Isaiah 46:10. I make known the end from the beginning. My purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. It didn't make her situation disappear, but it did shift her gaze. She wasn't praying for victory anymore. She was praying from it. You see, there is a difference between hope and certainty. Hope says, maybe this will work out. Certainty says, Jesus has already gone before me. And that's where Grace began to change. She didn't need all the answers. She just needed to anchor herself in who held them. So she started talking differently. Not fake positivity, but faithful clarity. When someone asked, "How are you holding up?" she replied, "Jesus is walking with Mazo, I'm not alone." When someone cried in front of her, fearing the worst, she said, "I understand, But I also believe the story's not finished yet. These weren't rehearsed lines. They were revelations. Not because her body was better, but because her spirit was no longer panicking. And that's the second step for you. Speak like the end is already redeemed. Because it is. Jesus doesn't walk into situations wondering what will happen. He walks in knowing how he'll carry you through it. You may cry. You may ache. You may feel fear again tomorrow. But beneath it all, let this truth steady you. The outcome is already in God's hands and He's not surprised. Grace finished her first round of tests. The results were uncertain. The road ahead still long. But something remarkable had changed. She didn't feel like she was drowning anymore. She felt like she was held. And in the next step of her journey, Michael would reveal how her words, yes, even her whispers, could become weapons against despair. Because healing is not just about what you endure. It's about what you declare. Grace didn't feel brave. She didn't feel powerful. She didn't wake up with fire in her bones or a warrior's cry in her throat. She simply got up, brushed her teeth, opened her Bible, and said, "God, I'm still here." And heaven responded not with noise, but with strength. Because the third principle in Archangel Michael's divine system is this: what you say builds the walls of your survival. Michael called it the Sacred Declaration Protocol. It's not about positive thinking. It's not about pretending everything is okay. It's about spiritually framing your reality in alignment with heaven's truth, not the doctor's facts. He said, "Words are scaffolding for miracles. What you speak becomes the atmosphere you live in." Grace didn't understand at first. Until one afternoon, standing at the kitchen sink, she heard her own voice say out loud, "I'm not dying, I'm deepening." The words came out like a sigh, but they struck something deep in her. She realized she had the power to narrate her valley in a way that gave her strength. So she began building her day around sacred declarations, not superstitions, not magical thinking, truth-based, scripture-backed, spirit-breathed language. Before the doctor appointments, "Jesus, you go before me. You stand behind me. I walk in your favor." Deuteronomy 31:8. While waiting for blood test results, "My body may be afflicted, but my spirit is anchored." 2 Corinthians 4:16. When fear crept in during the night, "I shall not die, but live, and declare the works of the Lord." Psalm 118:17. These weren't desperate incantations. They were spiritual warfare. Because here's what most forget. The enemy speaks too. He whispers fear. "This will kill you." He lies in silence. "God isn't listening." He twists truth. "You're being punished." And if you don't speak, Bacchae fills the atmosphere with shadow. Michael reminded Grace, faith is not silent. It speaks, even if the voice trembles. So she declared out loud even if it was just a whisper. Because each time she did, she took territory. Her children noticed it. "Mom, you're handling this better than we thought you would." She smiled. "I'm not handling it, I'm speaking through it." And that's when she knew. Her faith wasn't about appearing strong. It was about speaking life while feeling weak. You, listening now, may not have the strength to preach or the energy to pray for hours. But you have this power, to say one true sentence a day, to let your voice agree with God, not with fear. Try this. When you feel panic, say, "This is not the end." When you feel invisible, say, "He sees me still." When you feel hopeless, say, "He is not finished with me yet." These small declarations become spiritual scaffolding. They lift your perspective. They hold up your soul. They build an invisible architecture where miracles can rest. That night, Grace knelt at her bedside and said, "Jesus, thank you for one more day to speak truth." And in the spirit, Michael smiled. Because the darkest valleys are afraid of one thing: a woman who still speaks light. In Part 5, the final step will be revealed. The moment Grace takes her greatest action not for healing alone, but for purpose. Because the final victory of this journey is not just survival. It's becoming someone others can follow into their own battles. Grace stood at her window, watching the sun rise slow and golden over the treetops. It was the same sun that rose the day she got her diagnosis. But now, it felt like something more. A witness, a reminder, a quiet confirmation, you're still here. Not everyone gets this far. Some collapse under the fear. Some disappear under the weight of appointments, isolation, and unspoken dread. But Grace? She walked through the fire. And instead of smelling like smoke, she smelled like purpose. Because Archangel Michael had taught her the final principle in heaven's divine healing system. And it wasn't about survival. It was about assignment. Michael's last message was clear. Healing is not complete until it's offered to someone else. The final principle is called the redemption mandate. It means this: the pain you've walked through becomes sacred once it's used to carry someone else. One evening, Grace sat in her living room with a younger woman from her church. The woman had just received her own diagnosis. She was shaking, pale, on the edge of tears. Grace didn't give her advice. She sat beside her, held her hand, and whispered, "I know this fear. I know what it's like to sit in a doctor's office and forget how to breathe. But I also know Jesus walks that hallway with you." The woman began to cry, not just because of the comfort, but because Grace was proof. Proof that survival was possible. Proof that joy could return. Proof that faith could outlast fear. You see, we often think the miracle is the healing of the body. But sometimes the real miracle is this: becoming a lighthouse for someone else while you're still learning how to shine again. Grace wasn't healed instantly. Some of her scans were still unclear. She still had appointments and test results ahead. But she had something far more powerful now. She had testimony. Michael told her, "When heaven allows you to walk through the valley and you come back speaking life, you become an ambassador of resurrection." And that's what Grace had become. Not just a woman recovering from illness, but a woman reclaiming her assignment. She started writing letters to other women at the hospital. Short notes, scriptures, stories of how God showed up on the hardest days. Sometimes she left them anonymously. Sometimes she stayed and prayed with the women who received them. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because she remembered what it felt like to be alone in a sterile room, wondering if heaven still heard her heartbeat. And she vowed, no one should ever walk that path without knowing they are seen. You, who are still listening, maybe you haven't seen the breakthrough yet. Maybe you're mid-treatment. Maybe your voice still trembles. Maybe the darkness still visits at night. But if you've heard anything in this story, hear this: you are not walking this alone. Jesus is not watching from the distance. He is walking in step with your breath, your pain, your prayers. And even know, yes, now you are being prepared to comfort someone else one day, not in spite of your pain, but because of what it taught you. This is the full circle. This is the redemption mandate, that a wounded soul who speaks light becomes the very evidence that God still heals, not just bodies, but identities, stories, futures. Grace stood by her window, eyes lifted, and prayed the final prayer of her journey. God, if you can use this, then let me be a miracle walking, not just healed, but lit with purpose. And heaven responded with peace, because Jesus already knew the outcome, and he was never going to let her walk it alone, and neither will he let you.